Stan is heading to Charlie's house on the other side. They decided to form a hunting group. Due to low snowfall, they cannot use snowmobiles and must rely on cars for transportation. A moose can easily yield hundreds of pounds of meat, while reindeer produce much less, requiring 5 adult males to match one moose. 2 experienced hunters team up, potentially securing enough deer meat for the winter. Stan typically uses a dog sled or snowmobile in winter, as he doesn't own a car. This time, he has the chance to drive Charlie's car, which offers more flexibility than a dog sled. They then set off towards a bald mountain 40 kilometers away, where deer are often found on the open mountaintop. They need to go above the tree line to spot them. By the time they reach the top, it's nearly evening, with only 5 hours of daylight this season, soon followed by the polar night, known to the natives as the dark period. Stan immediately praises Charlie's car and enjoys using the binoculars, spotting minute details. Migrating reindeer leave clear traces, ranging from dozens to thousands. However, Stan doesn't find any reindeer after a long observation. They hike to the highest peak, a historical migration route for reindeer, which changed after last year's sudden wildfire destroyed much of their moss food source. At the top, they find no deer but see a crow, often followed by wolves, and sometimes hunters for tracking prey. Charlie keeps an eye on the direction where the crow lands, and indeed spots traces of deer in a valley. Stan confirms animal tracks near a creek by a rock pointed out by Charlie, clearly left by deer. The path there is rough, and with darkness approaching, they decide to camp and continue the next day. They descend the mountain before dark and stay overnight in Stan's cabin. The next morning, they pack early, every minute of the 5 daylight hours counting. However, Stan's car won't start, possibly frozen from the night's sub-zero temperatures. They manage to start it after heating the engine with a fire. The road seen from the mountaintop is challenging, virtually non-existent. Their destination is at the foot of the opposite mountain, currently obscured by bushes and trees. The deer tracks were found in a valley. The plan is for Stan to drive the deer out of the woods into an open area where Charlie is waiting to hunt. Stan clears a path through the bushes, which are nearly impassable for vehicles. As he tries to ascend a steep slope, the car tips over. Fortunately, he jumps out in time. The all-terrain vehicle, designed for such incidents, suffers minor damage like a cracked windshield. Unable to climb the slope, they retreat and try another route. The car gets stuck, and despite switching to 4-wheel drive, it remains immobile. They use a winch attached to the car and a sturdy bush as an anchor to slowly pull the vehicle out. Meanwhile, Charlie, a kilometer away, waits for the deer that never show. Suspecting an issue, he follows the tire tracks and finds Stan, preventing him from entering the bushes. After a conversation, he learns about the overturned car. Relieved that Stan is unharmed, Charlie is surprised that Stan nearly made it through the bushes and was about to retrieve the car when he arrived. Stan's quick thinking and adaptability impress Charlie, especially considering he is over 60 years old. As the sun sets, and with insufficient fuel for the trip, this hunting expedition is declared a failure. For safety, they decide to wait until the snow is thicker before hunting again. Recently, Chris and his wife caught a large beaver, providing them with food for 2 weeks. Jesse cut the last piece of beaver meat. There are no large animals like moose or reindeer near their camp, so stocking up for winter is a long-term task. They eat the meat with vegetables as much as possible, but the beaver will eventually run out. The water is now starting to freeze, making it impossible to hunt beaver with bows and arrows. Chris suggests net fishing in the river, where fish migrate to spawn. After their last beaver meal, they go to a nearby river, now thinly iced over. Normally, the ice must be 10 centimeters thick to safely walk on. Chris eyes a nearby whirlpool, a resting spot for river fish and an ideal place for nets. He taps the ice with an ice pick. If it doesn't break under force, it can support his weight. The ice is thicker near the shore and breaks easily in the middle, about 3 centimeters thick. Moving forward is clearly unsafe, but they need to cross to set the nets. Chris cuts down a birch tree, splits it, and plans to use it as a ladder to distribute his weight and cross the thin ice. This method proves effective. Next, Chris cuts ice holes every 2 to 3 meters, using sticks tied with ropes to extend the net. This usually requires 2 people. Once across, they use sticks to secure the net between 2 ice holes. Now, they wait to see how many fish the net catches. Later, They check the net's catch. If they encounter migrating fish, their meat needs for the month are covered. When they pull up the net, they realize their expectations were too high. It contains only 2 fish. While Chris and his wife worry about their next meal, Moore, 90 kilometers away, does not. He raises 5 large pigs, having raised 4 goats last winter. This autumn, like other hunters in town, Courtney didn't catch any moose for the winter. They have pigs and don't worry about meat. But feeding the pigs is a concern. Pigs eat a lot. Moore needs 40 pounds of pig feed daily. In this frigid region, there's hardly any natural food for them. Raising animals is costly because all feed must be purchased at high prices. Pigs don't tolerate cold well. Temperatures of -40 to 50 degrees can kill them. Moore rushes to fatten them before the polar night for slaughtering. After finishing 2 buckets of feed, they still want more. Moore collects fruit and vegetable peels from Courtney's home, barely enough for a snack for the pigs. They then go to the town's dump. A unique situation for the Moore family. Leftover food and vegetable scraps from town end up here, like spoiled carrots and leftover vegetable leaves, all usable as pig feed. However, the food found at the dump is limited and not enough for one meal. Back home, Moore dumps the collected scraps into the pigsty. He's not ready to slaughter the pigs yet. The meat from 5 pigs isn't enough to last the winter. He must find a way to buy more grain-like corn to feed them. 90 kilometers southeast of Tanana on the Kuskokwim River, Chris and his wife are reinforcing their cabin in preparation for the upcoming polar night. They use lit candles to find draft points in the cabin, as even a small draft can lead to significant heat loss in winter. They plug these drafts with old cotton, then secure it with iron nails and coarse hemp rope, a method that can last for decades. The polar night in Alaska lasts about 40 days, with temperatures potentially dropping to -60 or 70 degrees Celsius and daylight lasting less than 4 hours. During this extended night, it's not suitable to go outside. They must stay indoors. A warm cabin is essential. At this time, their kerosene lamp begins to dim. The loneliness of the polar night is already overwhelming. Without light, it's like hibernating. Chris decides to build a steam generator. He uses an old water heater tank to boil water and a metal can to handle some pressure. He finds an old chainsaw to use as a pistonnets. Single-cylinder engine is a perfect reciprocating piston. He modifies the spark plug hole to let steam in, with the output shaft functioning as before, adding a pulley and a trigger wire to control the steam valve, similar to how camshafts control intake and exhaust. Once their steam generator is assembled, they connect the steam boiler and piston with a hose outdoors. For safety, Chris prepares a pressure release valve. Ideally, a pressure gauge would help monitor boiler pressure directly, but without one, they rely on the steam release to judge. They use a lithium-powered drill as the generator. Reversing its motor charges its batteries. When the steam pressure builds, they open the piston valve. Initially, the flywheel turns slowly, but as steam pressure increases, it speeds up. However, they soon encounter a problem: the intake valve malfunctions, causing the hose to burst under pressure. Their initial test proves the concept works, but some connections need reinforcing. They remove the steam boiler from the fire, reinforce the connections with duct tape, and fix the steam valve. The second test is more stable, and the electricity generated is enough to light a small bulb and charge batteries. If the boiler and piston were larger, constructing a vehicle wouldn't be a challenge. After solving the lighting issue, they start stockpiling firewood for the winter. They aim to gather enough wood for 40 days before the polar night begins. They cut dead spruce trees nearby. There's nothing quite like chopping wood in the forest with your spouse. If there's anything better, they might as well cut a few more trees. The chopped wood must be split into smaller pieces to be used as firewood. Their experience shows in the growing pile of firewood by their door, now stacking up to the third wall. At this time, a man approaches them, looking familiar. It turns out to be Chris's father, Stu, who knows them well. At 65, Stu arrives in a small plane, landing on a lake 20 kilometers away since there are no nearby landing strips. In the 19th century, the federal government introduced a Homestead Act to attract immigrants to Alaska, offering 30 acres of permanent land to settlers. Stu was among those immigrants. He notices the fish by the door and reminds the young couple to be bear aware. Although most bears are hibernating at this time, some are still searching for food. and encountering one can be regrettable. After entering the cabin, they drank coffee and discussed the ongoing issue of food storage. They decided to build an elevated storage room to safeguard against predators like wolves and wolverines, even if bears weren't a concern. Essentially, it involved constructing a platform between two trees and installing a pulley system for easy access to stored items. They tested it immediately by placing the fish they caught a few days ago on it. Stu felt proud seeing his son adapt to wilderness life, reminiscent of his own experiences decades ago. 90 kilometers away in Tanana, the town's only water plant was flashing alarms. Charlie, the plant manager, checked it immediately. The alarm indicated a critical water shortage. 2/3 of the town's residents depended on this plant, which usually drew water from 3 shallow wells in summer. In winter, the wells dried up and froze, drastically reducing available liquid water. With only 4 days' water supply left, Charlie activated an emergency plan to draw and filter water from the Yukon River. He and a plant worker used an auger to drill through the ice, which was about 1/2 meter thick. They easily penetrated the ice, but unexpectedly hit dirt, indicating the river was drying up faster than anticipated. Extending the existing pipeline was necessary, but the town had no spare pipes. Charlie considered buying them from Fairbanks. A new road he had opposed might now be of use. After ordering the pipes, he was informed they couldn't be delivered past a point 40 kilometers from the town. Charlie had them left on the roadside, and then sought Stan's help to transport them using a dog sled, as rocky road sections could damage a snowmobile's transmission. Although Stan's home didn't use the town's water, he agreed to help transport the pipes. He traveled 10 kilometers along the Yukon River, then crossed the river to continue on a 30-kilometer road. Dog sleds are slower than snowmobiles, and by the time he reached the pipes, it was evening. The pipes were light but long. Stan used a sled board to secure one end of the pipes and began the return journey. Contrary to Charlie's advice, the road was fully snow-covered and suitable for a snowmobile, which could have made it back before dark. The sled dogs struggled on some steep uphill sections, and as night approached and they were still 20 kilometers from town, Stan chose to spend the night outdoors. Despite the sled dogs' resilience to cold, he gathered spruce branches to insulate them from the snow. He spent the night in his snowmobile's sleeping bag, a testament to the toughness required to survive in this environment. The next day, while Charlie was clearing snow from the river surface, Stan returned with the pipes. Quick-release joints made connecting the pipes easy. Insulating them with snow, they just needed to drill a hole in the ice and drop in a water pump. However, the drill bit couldn't penetrate the ice and got stuck. Even 3 men couldn't retrieve it. They resorted to using an ice pick and a chainsaw when necessary to create enough space to dislodge the stuck drill bit. After several minutes, they finally broke through the ice, and clear river water gushed out. Dropping a small pump into the hole, they successfully resolved the town's water crisis. Although Stan didn't benefit directly from the town water, he consistently contributed to the community, always ready to help when needed. A few days later, Stan was building a shelter cabin and realized the new road lacked places for refuge. He had been forced to spend a night outdoors recently, and preparing this shelter was meant to prevent such situations. The cabin's foundation was designed with skis for easy movement, and it was painted bright red for high visibility. Stan planned to place it in the most dangerous parts of the road, where machinery was prone to failure. There was a downhill section leading to the Yukon River, so to prevent the cabin from sliding uncontrollably, he used a chain to slow it down on the skis, removing it once reaching the river. However, traversing the river was challenging, as the soft snow caused the tires to spin in place. Stan's truck got stuck in the middle of the Yukon River, and what was supposed to be a day's work turned impossible. He left the cabin there, planning to return the next day with a solution. The following day, he and James brought a military bulldozer from town, which easily handled the terrain inaccessible to cars. Building a shelter cabin midway along the new road was essential, as the town's residents would use it. However, Stan arrived with the bulldozer, but forgot the trailer hitch. They found a coarse iron nail to use instead. With the bulldozer's help, they pushed the soft snow aside and easily completed the remaining 10 kilometers. At the final uphill, the rope used for towing suddenly snapped, sending the cabin sliding downhill towards James, who narrowly avoided it on his snowmobile. This incident brought good and bad news. The good news was the cabin didn't overturn. The bad news was the iron nail was no longer usable. Fortunately, They had a chain on the bulldozer, which they used, questioning why they hadn't used it initially. Once up the hill, they reached the spot where the cabin would be placed, elevating it on wooden blocks to prevent water damage during the thaw. When Stan first arrived here, he had no survival experience or hunting skills. It was the residents of Tanana who helped him through his difficulties. Now, everything he did for the town was a way to give back. Early that morning, he dug out his long, unused snowmobile, used only for long trips. He also prepared many fish baits, and Bob would join him in trapping. So far, Charlie's trapping season had only yielded 2 minks. They were heading to a cabin 50 kilometers downstream at Granlund Creek, fully stocked, indicating they wouldn't return soon. Charlie brought survival supplies, and Bob brought gasoline. Traveling after a snowstorm was difficult with soft snow and fallen bushes as obstacles. However, they were encouraged by many fresh mink tracks along the way and started setting traps even before reaching the cabin. This untouched wilderness was Charlie's final sanctuary. They set traps wherever there were tracks, seeing such abundance of wildlife that Charlie hadn't seen in over a decade. In a few hours, Charlie and his son had set several traps nearby. Now, they would see what they could catch. They continued towards the cabin, but accidents happen unexpectedly. Charlie's snowmobile gradually lost control and flipped over on the river, pinning him underneath. With Bob's help, he managed to crawl out. Fortunately, both he and the snowmobile were mostly unharmed due to the thick snow cushioning the fall. However, the snowmobile was damaged, and they had to use a rope for a temporary fix. As long as it held until they reached the cabin, it didn't matter. After trekking for a while, the two arrived at the remote cabin before dark and noticed the windows were open, giving them an uneasy feeling that a bear might be hibernating inside. Bob looked through the window and saw no bear, then climbed inside. There was no bear, but the cabin's interior was severely damaged, although Charlie had left it clean last time. The fireplace's chimney was essential, as it was the main source of warmth. They cleared the trash from inside the cabin and burned it outside. The next day, Charlie and his son needed supplies to repair the cabin. With no hardware stores in the wilderness, they drove several kilometers to find Neil, a gold prospector. They had promised to hunt a bear for Neil last year, but hadn't found it. Neil had managed to deal with a black bear himself during the summer, and now its skin was displayed on his wall as a warning. After some small talk, Bob explained their purpose and hoped to exchange labor for some stovepipe and plywood. People living in the wilderness often have such building materials stored. In exchange, Charlie and his son would dig a gold prospecting site for Neil. This was easy in summer, but challenging in winter, requiring them to clear bushes and thaw the frozen ground with fire. Most prospectors avoid winter, but Neil was an exception, and he even offered Charlie and his son a share in the gold from a new mining setup planned for spring. This prospecting was preparation for that. Charlie and his son's expressions showed their decision. Their only income was from winter trapping, so adding gold prospecting during the thaw was a great opportunity. After burning the ground, they brought some prospecting equipment. The ground was still hard, but they only needed to take samples, which didn't hinder their work. From just a small pot of soil, after crushing and washing in a pan, they found a gold nugget the size of a peanut, a significant find compared to weeks of trapping. Charlie saw great potential in this land, foreseeing wealth and comfort. They didn't neglect their trapping despite finding gold. After exchanging for the chimney and plywood, they immediately repaired the cabin. They planned to live there permanently and needed the cabin to meet long-term living standards. After the repairs, Charlie and Bob went to check their trapping lines. Gold prospecting was for the thaw period. Trapping was the current main task. When luck was on their side, it was unstoppable. They found the desired mink on their traps. Bob quickly dispatched it by breaking its neck and packed it to take back. The land held more surprises, with the next trap also showing a catch. Given the many tracks around the traps, a bountiful harvest was expected. Each mink skin could bring in $130, and they caught 11 in one day, totaling about $1,500. Charlie hadn't been this happy in a long time. Besides the gold and the successful trapping, Charlie loved the solitude of meeting only Neil in days. He enjoyed the privacy, the ability to prospect and trap in an environment he loved. Who wouldn't adore such a heavenly place? As they say, one person's joy is another's sorrow. In this case, it was Chris and his wife who were distressed. A large tree, felled by a blizzard, had crashed onto their food storage platform, spilling the fats and fish they had stored for the winter. This was crucial for their survival through the cold months, and now it was ruined. They had to recount their remaining food: some rice, oats, peanuts, and just one frozen fish, barely enough for 5 to 6 days. With almost no game to hunt this season and only about 20 liters of gasoline left, they decided they had no choice but to return to Fairbanks. Even though they were set on returning to the city, they needed to plan their route carefully. 20 liters of gasoline would only get their snowmobile around 80 to 90 kilometers, but they were nearly 150 kilometers from Fairbanks. The next day, they packed their belongings and set out for the city with their remaining fuel, knowing it wouldn't be enough to reach their destination. Their only option was to head towards the newly constructed road to Tanana, hoping to encounter passing vehicles if they got stranded. The wilderness road was much more difficult than they had anticipated, especially since their snowmobile was an old, repaired model. Steep slopes were particularly challenging and increased their fuel consumption. A quarter of the way into their journey, they had already used half of their gasoline. As the sun set near the horizon and temperatures approached minus 50 degrees Celsius, Jesse began to shiver uncontrollably, losing sensation in his feet, a sign of potential frostbite. Chris had to warm him with his own body until he could feel his extremities again and they could continue. As night fell and temperatures dropped further, they ran out of fuel without reaching the Tanana Road, or even the Tanana River. They left the snowmobile behind and continued on foot, pulling their luggage on a sled. The daylight quickly faded, and they were forced to spend the night outdoors. With the river in front of them, indicating they were still 12 kilometers from the road, they found a sheltered area in the trees to camp. The nighttime temperature dropped to minus 50 degrees, forcing them to quickly start a fire using the fuel from their chainsaw to ignite dry branches. Their shelter consisted of a sleeping bag, a waterproof cloth, and a fire. The next day, they crossed the Tanana River and faced a 20-kilometer wilderness path, which proved more challenging than a normal 40-kilometer route. Seeing trees cut by humans reassured them that they hadn't lost their way. Continuing forward, they finally reached the road from Tanana to Fairbanks. Being on the road meant they had a chance to be rescued, although it was uncertain when a vehicle might pass by. Sometimes, few cars traveled this route in a day. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long before a vehicle appeared and gave them a lift. 2 years ago, they had returned to the wilderness full of confidence. Now, stepping back into civilized society. However, Jesse was convinced that their stay in the city wouldn't last long, and they would soon return to nature, soon return to nature, soon return to nature.